First of all, I'm grateful to organizers of MAPICON who have given me this important topic to deliberate. Today, I'll be talking about acute mountain sickness, and this is going to become a common problem with the opening of Himalayas for tourists, especially the easy availability of flights and opening of Rohtang Tunnel, due to which now the unacclimatized people are able to reach at significant heights and are exposed to the risks of the heights. So first of all, we should be sure what is a definition of high altitude. But before deliberating on that, we should know what are the heights of the common hills which we visit frequently. The medium altitude is around 1500 to 2500 meters. That is around 5000 feet to 8000 feet. Srinagar, Shimla, Manali, Kufri, Chahal, etc. are situated at that height. High altitude is arbitrarily defined as a height from 2500 meters to 3600 meters. That is around 8000 feet to around 12,000 feet. And Gulmarg, Oli, Zozila, Leh, Kargil, Kaza, Rohtang fall in this category. Then comes the very high altitude, that is around 3600 meters to 5500 meters, and Rohtang, Gangotri, Janskar, etc. are in this category. And finally are the extreme altitude areas, that is where the height is more than 5500 meters. And mostly it consists of passes like Khardungla. And as we go further, Siachen is also falling in this category, and at the extreme end is Mount Everest, situated at a height of around 29,000 feet. High altitude is arbitrarily defined as a height of around 2500 meters, that is around 8000 feet above the mean sea level. This is a level at which the patients usually start having symptoms of high altitude sickness. But no height is safe. People can have symptoms even at a height which is less than this. It is estimated that around 15 crore people reside permanently above this height, and around 50 million people, that is around 5 crore people, enter these areas every year, either as tourists, trekkers, mountaineers, pilgrims, porters, workers, and soldiers. And initially, all of them are unacclimatized, except for mountaineers and soldiers, where a proper acclimatization process is followed. Most of the people go there unacclimatized and are entirely exposed to the risk of high altitude. This you all must recognize is Mount Kailash. This is another Mani Mahesh, situated in Chamba district of Himachal Pradesh. Then finally, this is Kinnar Kailash. This area is, of course, creating a lot of problems these days because of its close proximity to Rampur area, and a lot of cases of acute mountain sickness and even fatalities we are seeing this place because it is quite close, and a lot of young people, without recognizing the risk of the altitude, are attempting to cover it quick, fast, and then return, and consequently they are having a lot of problems. This we all know is Amarnath and regular Amarnath yatras, except for COVID this year. And last year also, they are being carried out, but proper medical facilities and a system is being followed for the pilgrims. So and medical aid is available. So usually not much problem is encountered there. And finally, we must be grateful to our soldiers who are situating at the most inhospitable area probably in this world, and at a height of around 21,000 feet above mean sea level, where earlier no person used to survive and live. Still they are there and saving our country at a tremendous cost to their personal health. So first, we should understand what is the problem at high altitude. High altitude, we must see at the altitude of sea level, that is 0 meters, the barometric pressure that around 21%. But because of gravitational pull at sea level, it is around, the partial pressure of oxygen is around 159. But as we ascend upwards, the gravitation pull of the earth to the air decreases, and consequently the partial pressure of the oxygen also decreases. So air becomes thinner and thinner as we go up. At sea level, as I've told you earlier, the atmospheric pressure is 760 millimeter of mercury. Oxygen is 21%, carbon dioxide is around 0.04%, rest is nitrogen. The partial pressure of oxygen multiplied by the atmospheric pressure is around, it makes a level of around 159 millimeter of mercury. But at Mount Everest, the atmospheric pressure is reduced to 250 only. Oxygen is still at 21%, but the partial pressure of the oxygen now comes down to 53 only. And so consequently, the air is much thinner, though the percentage of oxygen and nitrogen remains constant. To survive for it, human body acclimatizes, and a series of complex physiological adaptations in response to altitude occur. Acclimatization finally depends on the severity of hypoxic stress, that is, the height which is being reached by the person, the rate of onset of hypoxia, how quickly one reaches that height. And this is becoming more and more important, because in the morning a person will be in Bombay, and within 2 hours he will be in Leh, and will be gaining a height of around 12,000 feet, which earlier was not possible. And finally, the individual's physiological response to hypoxia is also responsible for acclimatization. All these three factors together are responsible for whether the patient becomes acclimatized or not. So what are the physiological changes which occur in high altitude travelers which help him to acclimatize? So first of all is hyperventilation. I'll be taking all these things separately. One is hyperventilation. Second is shortness of breath during exertion. Third is changed breathing pattern at night. Then is frequent awakenings at night. And finally is the increased urination. Now, who are vulnerable for acute mountain sickness? Honestly, nobody is immune. Almost all people, whether they remain are the new visitors to that area or are native highlanders, they all are susceptible. Of course, unacclimatized individuals are more susceptible, but native highlanders are also susceptible. If they move down, remain there, and then re-enter the high altitude, they become susceptible. And if a person supposedly who is a resident of a high altitude is ascending up further up from the native height, that is a person who is living in Leh, is going up Khardungla and then staying there, then he also becomes susceptible for acute mountain sickness. It is better to describe acute mountain sickness as acute mountain sickness syndromes. And they are basically now classified into three categories. One is benign acute mountain sickness, but nothing is benign here. If left as such and not managed properly, they can land into further conditions, that is high altitude pulmonary edema and high altitude cerebral edema, which are the other spectrums of the acute mountain syndromes. So how to predict who are at high risk? High risk prediction today becomes very easy because of easy availability of pulse oximeters. Earlier, they were very difficult to have, maybe around 3-4 years back, and only physicians and people used to have it. But of late, now the oxygen pulse oximeters, they are easily available with almost all persons, and all persons who are going to high altitude area should carry them with them. And if the pulse oximeter at rest is measured, and then on mild exertion, as was there in COVID cases, if there is fall in oxygen saturation, this predicts impending acute mountain sickness, and this is making the diagnosis and probability of acute mountain sickness very easily if a person is having pulse oximeter with him. And of course, then is the Lake Lewis scoring system, which is also helping. It is a self-scoring system by the person who is visiting high altitude. It's not a diagnostic criteria as such itself, but it is a set of self-reported symptoms, of which one is headache, second is GI symptoms like appetite or nausea, vomiting, or severe nausea and vomiting. Then comes fatigue and weakness, and finally dizziness or lightheadedness. There was earlier another category of self-monitored symptom of difficulty in sleeping, that is sleep disturbances, but of late it has been taken out by the Lake Lewis, from the Lake Lewis score, and now it is not part of that, because sleep disturbances are quite common at high altitude, and it has been observed by them that they probably do not fulfill the criteria of self-reporting symptoms. So these four symptoms, headache, GI symptoms, fatigue, weakness, and dizziness, they constitute the important self-reporting symptoms, and a person who is visiting high altitude should know about it. And then there are easily identifiable physical examination signs, that is change in the mental status, which their colleagues can also notice. Then there is ataxia in heel to toe walking and peripheral edema, and there is scoring system given to all of these. And if a person who is self-monitoring himself and is having them, three or more of them, then it signifies that he may be having acute mountain sickness. And if he is having a score of more than 5, it is suggestive of severe disease. But as of late now, sleeping symptoms have been taken out. So this score has been titrated by around 3. What constitutes high altitude? There is practically no consensus so far, but it has been seen that at a height of around 2,500 meters, the persons can have symptoms, but no height is immune. And 5,400 meters is extremely high altitude, and there is no permanent human acclimatization at that level, and there is no human settlement also above that level, with Siachen a very notable exception. And as I said earlier, we should be grateful to our army people who are managing at that height and saving our country. Acute mountain cases have been reported at a height of around 2,000 meters and above. And the probability of acute mountain sickness depends on altitude attained. That is, what is the height at which the person has reached. The more the height, the more chances of acute mountain sickness. Then comes the speed of ascent. How quickly the person has reached that height. This is very important, because as I said earlier, a person is today in the morning in Delhi. In 45 minutes, he will be in Leh by flight. A person is in Bombay at around 12. At 2 p.m., he will be can be in Leh. So very high and very quick reaching of height is responsible for making the acute mountain sickness more probable. Speed of onset is also very important, by air also and by road also. With the opening of Rohtang Pass, a person may be in Manali in the morning, and then he may immediately cross the Rohtang Pass, and then immediately proceed towards Ladakh and exposing himself to the risk. Then physical exertion, what one does at that altitude, this is very, very important. And for the proper acclimatization, the person must restrict his activities to the level that he doesn't have any discomfort. Then comes other variables like age. So common thinking is that older people will be more vulnerable, but it is the other way around. We have seen that younger people are more vulnerable. Why is it so? because the elderly people usually respect their age and they may not behave inappropriately. Whereas the younger people, they are more enthusiastic, more energetic, and do more physical activities than they should do at that height, and then they can land in trouble. We have seen most of the times that it is the younger people who are having more problem. In addition, there is peer pressure. If a group of colleagues is going, someone is lagging behind, he may be lagging behind because of some problem and because of acute mountain sickness. But to show his fitness, he may overexert himself and then land. We have seen many times young people suffering acute mountain sickness, high altitude pulmonary edema, and even fatalities. Sex, female, of course, are a bit more conservative and they don't overexert. So male may be at more risk. Obesity, hypertension, and prior history, obesity and hypertension are also, and CAD, respiratory disorders like COPD, of course, they will be contributing more. And finally is the prior history. This prior history is of whether if a person has had acute mountain sickness in the past, he should be advised not to visit that place again, because in subsequent visits also they are much more vulnerable, or rather more vulnerable. So if a person has got problem at high altitude, they should not try to visit the high altitude again. Now, various factors which are contributing in development of acute mountain sickness can be categorized into environmental, genetic, and changes in the cardiovascular, respiratory, and oxygen delivery system. The environmental factors are that at high altitude, there is decreased partial pressure of oxygen, and this oxygen saturation falls further due to hypoventilation in sleep. This leads to tissue hypoxia. At higher altitude, the temperature is quite cold and there is high wind velocity. So consequently, the humidity of air is quite low. There is insensible loss of water, and consequently there is dehydration. And it has been seen that lowered bariatric pressure is directly proportional to the high altitude. And ultimately, it is a major factor for the acclimatization and also for the development of acute mountain sickness. If you acclimatize yourself, you are safe. But if you are not able to acclimatize, you are having problem. And of course, those people who are residing in high altitude for generations, they are definitely more acclimatized, and there are certain changes in their body which help them to have natural acclimatization. What are they? The Highlanders are having barrel-shaped chest. Their body size, as you must have noticed, is smaller. Their ventilatory capacity and BMI is higher. There is right-sided preponderance of heart, that is right ventricular hypertrophy is there. And of course, baseline HB or erythrocytosis or increased hematocrit is more in these Highlanders. Then comes the pathophysiology of acute mountain sickness. As told earlier, hypobaric hypoxia is there at high altitude. Because of low atmospheric pressure, the air is thinner, the partial pressure of oxygen is less, so there is hypoxia. The body tries to compensate it by hyperventilation. This hyperventilation is mediated by the chemoreceptors in the carotid and aortic bodies. And then there is decreased oxygen gradient from inspired air to alveoli. This is initially seen in the first few hours. This leads to respiratory alkalosis because of hyperventilation and renal excretion of bicarbonate. It has been seen that at high altitude, small decrease in oxygen tension leads to significant drop in oxygen saturation. So it is not other way around. If you move from 1,000 meters, that is around 4,000 feet to 5,000 feet, there is no significant change in oxygen saturation. But when you are at a height of around 12,000 feet, go up to even 13,000, there is a drop in oxygen saturation. This is because of AA difference, that is the difference between arterial oxygen tension and alveolar tension. This leads to hypoxia-induced pulmonary vasoconstriction, and consequently pulmonary artery pressure increases. This increased in pulmonary artery pressure leads to uniform perfusion of the lungs and finally leads to acclimatized low Lander lung. But it has been seen that in spite of hyperventilation and reduction of AA gradient, arterial tension is still lower than at sea level. So what happens further? How body accommodates? There is transient increase in hemoglobin. Initially, it is due to diuresis. This diuresis is also part of hyperventilation, also bicarbonate loss also, and this increase in hemoglobin is also initially because of the dehydration which these persons suffer because of low humidity and cold ambient air at high altitude. So consequently, it has been seen that there is around 15 to 20% of decrease in the plasma volume initially. But after around 1 to 2 days, there is subsequent increase in HB due to increase in the erythropoietin levels. So three things are occurring simultaneously. One is hyperventilation, second is reduced AA gradient, third is increased hematocrit or HB. These three factors bring oxygen level in the blood to near normal. And affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen is decreased by increase in the partial pressure of oxygen. And this favors offloading of oxygen from hemoglobin. And consequently, the person is acclimatized. Now comes the benign acute mountain sickness. But here I would like to make clear there is nothing benign about it. If it is not taken care of properly, then all other sinister things will follow. Acute mountain sickness has been defined that in the setting of recent, that is 4 hour to 6 hour to 4 day gain in altitude, the presence of headache and at least one of the following symptoms, that is GIT symptoms in the form of anorexia, nausea and vomiting, fatigue or weakness, dizziness and sleep disturbances. If a person is having headache is must, and any one of the other symptoms, then probably the person is risk of having acute mountain sickness, or he may be having acute mountain sickness. But problem is that all these symptoms are very common and commonly taken part of travel related problems. Headache may be because of that, fatigue may be because of travel, exertion, and so usually they are underreported. And they usually last 6 hours to 4 days. Headache is usually frontal, throbbing, bilateral, increased in morning and with exertion. There is lightheadedness, malaise is there, nausea and vomiting may be associated. Sleep disturbances may be there. There may be some shortness of breath. All these things are benign, usually self-limiting and disappear. When this Lewis scoring system is given to travelers who are visiting high altitude and they report it, then it has been seen that most of the patients are having symptoms, but they usually subside by itself. So how do you manage it? So the management is, first is the cessation of ascent. That is, a person when one reaches one height, one should try to remain there at least for 24 hours, if not more, but otherwise even 2 days of stay at that height without further ascent is sufficient in most of the cases. They should try to acclimatize, become symptom-free at that height itself. For minor pain symptoms, they may take rest or analgesics. Estrazolamide 250 milligram BD or TDS for 2 to 3 days helps. And this can be even taken 1 day before visiting the higher altitude. But perioral numbness and tingling sensations are quite troublesome with that. And these persons should not take any sedatives, and no alcohol should be taken. Now comes the main problem, that is the high altitude pulmonary edema. High altitude pulmonary edema is, according to Lake Lewis criteria, is that in the setting of recent gain in altitude, at least 2 of the following symptoms, that is shortness of breath at rest. It is not exertional, it is shortness of breath at rest, cough, weakness or low exercise performance, and history of chest tightness or congestion. If these symptoms are there, in addition to any of the two of the following, that is, if these persons have got simultaneously tachycardia, they have got tachypnea, and on auscultation they are having crackles, central cyanosis is there, then these persons are having high altitude pulmonary edema, and of course X-ray chest will show diffuse pulmonary infiltrates, and it's not necessary to be bilateral. Usually they are seen unilateral and unequal. It is the most common medical emergency at high altitude, usually seen 1 to 3 days after arriving. Symptoms, as I said earlier, can be cough, shortness of breath, chest tightness, fatigue. More commonly seen in air travelers and re-entrants and those people who have just moved very quickly through the high altitudes. 50% of the cases occur in first 12 hours and they are rare after first week. So why they are occurring? They are because of the lack of acclimatization. This lack of acclimatization is because of rapid descent. This leads to accentuated alveolar hypoxia, leads to accentuated pulmonary hypertension, and so many factors like blunted hypoxic ventilatory drive, brisk hypoxic ventilatory vascular response, genetic factors, and increased sympathetic tone, they contribute to it. And in addition, cold, ambient temperature, exercise, exertion, they also help it. This leads to mechanical stress on the endothelium. The endothelium becomes vulnerable, and its epithelium also becomes vulnerable. There is fluid leak this epithelium and then subsequently in the alveoli, and interstitial and alveolar edema occurs and patient lands into high altitude pulmonary edema. This slide very nicely shows the mechanism of capillary leak in the high altitude pulmonary edema. The elevated pulmonary capillary pressure causes progressive distension of the vessel wall, leading to opening of endothelial and epithelial gaps through which first proteins and lateral RBC leak into the alveolar spaces, causing alveolar edema. To sum up, the mechanism of high altitude pulmonary edema is probably, because one thing is clear, that there is going to be pulmonary hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction and pulmonary hypertension subsequently to overcome that. When it is even and smooth, the person is acclimatized, but when this is uneven hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction, it exposes some capillaries to the high pressure and it damages their walls and leads to high permeability form of edema. The clinical features are patients are sick looking, they are having tachypnea, they are having tachycardia, they may be cyanosed, they may have temperature, flat neck veins are there, crepitation are there, and they may have altered sensorium, which is a very sinister prognosis. But here I would like to say that the moment they have got altered sensorium, then it is not high altitude pulmonary edema. The patient has landed or is landing into high altitude cerebral edema, which is very sinister and carries a very high mortality rates. So the investigation, they may be having polymorphonuclear leukocytosis. The pH may be around 7.4. The partial pressure of oxygen is around 34 mm. The oxygen saturation is around 65 to 70. And pulse oximeter is one thing which will help even a layperson. If he carries with them, monitor it regularly, then probably before he becomes very sick, he probably can have some sort of medical advice in time, without landing in further in trouble. Then ECG, these person can have sinus tachycardia, right axis deviation, T wave changes, and echo may show dilated RV, pulmonary artery, and diastolic dysfunction of the left ventricle. These are the grades by which into mild, moderate, and severe the high altitude pulmonary edema is classified. And of course, without going into further whether the X-ray chest, etc., the facilities are usually not available at high altitude. The most easily available thing which will help the person is pulse oximeter, and today it is easily available. any person who is having symptoms of dyspnea, dry cough, fatigue, and then having increase in the or worsening of the symptoms, then probably with the help of pulse oximeter, he can be diagnosed quite early, if not by himself, by his colleagues, and proper aid can be there. So how to manage these patients? The first and foremost is, and best of the treatment is, that they should be evacuated to the lower altitude immediately. The moment they lose altitude, they start improving, and any level of descent is helpful for them. So every effort to bring them to the lowest possible altitude to which they can be brought will be helpful. If not possible, we can buy the times by giving the patient oxygen therapy by high flow face mask. Nifedipine can help, 30 milligram BD. Hyperbaric bags, which I'll take up subsequently, they can be Gamo bags or Certec bags. They help to stimulate descent by raising pressure inside the bag to achieve ambient atmospheric pressure. At a altitude of, if a person is around 3000 meters, he can be simulated to reach at a height of around 1500. So around 15 to 1600 meters of height can be descended by keeping the person in these bags. This is a short-term solution, but can be life-saving. Sildenafil and beta-2 agonist can help, but still mortality can be 2% or above. So this is the hyperbaric Gamo bag. If you look into, it has got a foot pedal also, because at most of the places where the problem may be there, the electric supply may not be there, so it can be operated by foot also. Pressure is increased within the bag. Patient is put inside the bag by this zip, then tied down. Of course, there is optional intake valve for air compressor also. If electricity is available, that help can also be taken. And most of the times, these mountaineers at least carry it with them for any emergency which they can have at high altitude. Then comes the high altitude cerebral edema, so-called malignant acute mountain sickness. It is uncommon but most dangerous. It is usually associated with high altitude pulmonary edema. It should be suspected in any patient of acute mountain sickness with altered sensorium. Ataxia is one of the earliest symptoms to develop. There is diminution of vision, dizziness, drowsiness may be there, confusion and coma may be there. Mood changes are there, hallucinations are there. They can have seizures, incontinence, retention of urine. Focal neurological deficits can be there, fundal changes can be there. Diagnosis is usually clinical, as the investigations are usually not possible. And X-ray, if available, may show coexisting high altitude pulmonary edema. All these mountaineers have got a leader, but mountaineers are advised not to follow leader if he develops any symptom of altered sensorium, because at high altitude, any person, even their team leader, can have problem. So they are advised, if you think that your leader is having possibility of high altitude pulmonary edema, then don't follow his commands. Take your own decision. Otherwise, in mountaineers, usually the leader command is mandatory, but this is the exception. Because of altered sensorium, he may not give correct instructions. What is the exact mechanism is not known, but proposed pathophysiology is that hypoxia leads to hypoxemia. This leads to increased cerebral blood flow. It leads to increased cerebral blood volume. It leads to increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier. And consequently, there is increased cerebral blood flow, increased capillary pressure. There is brain swelling or edema is there. There is inadequate buffering by the cerebral spinal fluid, and patient leads into high altitude cerebral edema. This is a very pioneer study by Messrs. Haeckel et al., which clearly showed that the leak in acute mountain sickness, this is based on the basis of MRI studies of couple of patients of high altitude which they could manage. This suggests that leak is vasogenic in origin with increase in the permeability of endothelium. The cause of leak may be increase in the intravascular pressure or effect of hypoxemia per se. And subsequently, after recovery, these patients had reversal of these symptoms on MRI. What are the differential diagnoses? Of course, at high altitude, carbon monoxide poisoning has to be kept, dehydration, CNS infections can be there, acute psychosis can be there, exhaustion, hangover, hypoglycemia, diabetic ketoacidosis, hypothermia, migraine, seizure, stroke, etc. All these possibilities can be there, kept in mind. But when the patient is having usually pulmonary symptoms and then deteriorates, there is history of acute mountain sickness like symptoms prior to that, probably the person is having high altitude pulmonary edema. So how to manage these patients? It is by rapid evacuation to lower altitude. Descent, descent, and descent, that is the only way possible. Whether by porters, whether by ponies, these patients of high altitude cerebral edema cannot wait for helicopter, which may come, which may not come, or may take hours, which may be catastrophic for these patients. So if a patient has got high altitude cerebral edema, descent, 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 that is the only advice you can give to them. And in addition, it is possible for a person to have acute mountain sickness, high altitude cerebral edema, and high altitude pulmonary edema at the same time. And these things can occur in isolation. Also, a person who is otherwise well can straight away have high altitude cerebral edema. That part should be kept in mind. Needless to say, immediate descent and evacuation is the modality of treatment. Patient may be given oxygen. Dexamethasone is recommended both as prophylactic and therapeutic doses. It minimizes the extravascular leak into the brain. Hyperbaric therapy, if descent is not possible, to tide over. This is only to tide over. And estrazolamide before ascent and continued for 2-3 days is both prophylactic and as well as therapeutic in these patients, and definite benefit is there. Portable hyperbaric chamber may be life-saving, that is the Gamo bag. It is a sealed chamber with a pump. It is capable of generating up to 130 millimeter of mercury pressure, which is equivalent to reduction of around 1800 meters to 2400 meters. And can be life-saving. The patient should be kept inside the chamber till evacuation to lower altitude is possible. And patient should be reassessed every 90 to 120 minutes by decompressing the chamber and then reinflating it again. These are the two types of hyperbaric chambers which are portable and available. And finally, these are the recompression chambers which are available at the base hospital, like in Leh, it is available, in which the patient is put, properly managed, and this will take care of all the problems which the patient can have, and he can be simulated to even the sea level. Finally, is the prevention of acute mountain sickness and high altitude pulmonary edema. The various therapies which are being available, and they have been given the criteria grading. Gradual ascent, of course, is helpful. Nifedipine in divided doses, salmeterol 2B, tadalafil may help, dexamethasone may help, estrazolamide can be given, and high altitude cerebral edema, gradual ascent, of course, estrazolamide is helpful, dexamethasone is helpful, and duration should not be more than 10 days. And of course, other drugs probably are not useful. Then there is a proper acclimatization process, how to proceed in a person. This usually is practicable in the army setup where the soldiers are being introduced to heights, and also for mountaineers where they are going to great heights. So there is a proper protocol and schedule at 3 stages. That is stage 1, when the person is from 2700 meters to 3600 meters, then from 3600 meters to 45 meters, and then finally above 44 meters, then they have to follow the same second stage procedures. And when this procedure is followed, one can reach the various and greater heights easily. Of course, at some stage, the air is so thin that further mountaineering or this ascent can only be possible with continuous oxygen. But otherwise, most of the persons will be able to be acclimatized. And re-entry is those patients who are acclimatized and who have left for more than 10 days. They need acclimatization again. This is true for Highlanders also. Otherwise, they may have problems. They may usually have only benign acute mountain sickness, but they can have problems. So this part should be taken care of. And final is the dictum that one should not be a gamma. Here the gamma is the modern lifestyle that is very quick, fast, active. A person is reaching high altitude and then he's engaging in all activities which one should not do. Undue exertion, no rest, alcohol, heavy meals, not taking adequate fluids, and then sending up, not taking proper advice. So there is a old dictum at high altitude that you should not be a gamma in the land of Lama. That is, in the high altitude, we should follow the serene and calm life of the local people, where if we see them, then we should follow them because they are unhurried. They just follow their simple life with calmness of mind and without any undue exertion or stress. Thank you. Thank you very much.